Yes, my privilege. What a fantastic set of talks. I don't know if it was our brilliance or the magic of this NSF workshop that put you two together, because you got right to sort of the gap, and I think what we consider the grandest challenge of all for the type of work that we would love to do to prevent pandemics. And I think I'll just start it out with a question that both Ubli and I have for both of you. I don't know who would want to start. Maybe Joshua, because I think the question we have is how can we bridge the research being done on bat genomes, on virus discovery in bats, and on drug discovery, so the true countermeasures that are needed to avert pandemics? We think this data intensive machine learning has a role to play in that, but we don't know the pathway to do that. Do we even have enough data to get started? So over to you all.
Right. So there's the things we can do in the short term, and there's like the long-term dream, right?
Yeah.
In the short term, machine learning is going to be used in many areas that may be intersecting, that look at different pieces of the puzzle. So I mentioned the drug discovery, but in drug discovery, you may have just the part about like find the drug, but you also have the part about what's the right protein you might want to target, or the right set of proteins, and that connects to cell biology. And that may connect as well to understanding how the immune system works. So, so that's examples of different pieces of research that for now are not really well connected. But then if you go even further to things like the evolution of variants and so on, they're completely disconnected right now. But ultimately, of course, I think that machine learning can really change the game in biology to help us bring together the knowledge we already have with the knowledge that we can acquire with the masses of data that we will be collecting more and more. It's not a short-term goal, though. I think there's a lot to do, but the nice thing is many of the techniques, including some of those I talked about, for example, that combine modeling, like from biology or chemistry or physics, with data enriched machine learning, could be applied in many settings. Or the general questions about how do you search to optimize some treatment, or how do you consider causal effects. So these sort of things can be useful in many of these areas.
Yeah, do you just want to jump in on what you like? What are the data ready? What do you think are the needs?
I think I have been trying to, so if we take my work on aging, for example, where you would have just one species where we're looking at changes that happen in the population over 10 years, we're bringing in genomics, we're bringing in genotypes, we're bringing in field data, the day the baby bat was born on, just trying to see and it's difficult. And I've been thinking about, and so I was quite excited when I was hearing you talk, because AI, I think, may be the way ahead, or trying to find what is the, I suppose, edge that explains all of the results that you see. So I think that people haven't really sat down that closely and thought, how do you put everything, how do you put a phylogenetic tree, analyze in the right terms, with the genome, with ecological data? They're all different types of data. And right. They're not necessarily addressing the same thing, but I think that we do need to sit down, and I think it's the way ahead. And I was getting very excited listening to you talking, Joshua, thinking, right, that's it. Now, are we just using the word AI because we don't know how to do it any other way, or can we really find a true pattern? It's something I think the data is huge. I mean, ecological data, they're huge, and they're all different types, and there's problems with who records it. And then you have genome data, and then you have so there's lots of data, all very different, that we have to find ways that we can use to our advantage.
So the general strategy, if you have multiple sources of data that cover different aspects of a phenomenon, is you'd like to have the different sources have keys that match. So some variables may be common across different worlds, and then that allows you to connect the knowledge that is acquired with data and scientific knowledge on one hand, with the data and scientific knowledge on the other side. And then have some synergy that comes up.
Yeah, trying to find that one unique identifier. And that's what I've been doing.
No, you want as many as possible points of contacts, but whatever you can get.
Yeah. I think what Joshua's trying to say is that you want to have a way to try to register, connect, synchronize these disparate sources, but just as a positive, let me underscore that dealing with what we call multimodal data sets is actually one of the fortes of machine learning algorithms.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question that I'd like to direct to both of you, but I'm going to start out with Yoshua because I, of course, mentioned this in my introduction. But one of the big challenges that we're trying to address in this workshop is trying to understand how basic research in STEM, if you will, can result in actionable change that can help people, the community right away. And so for you, Yoshua, we can talk about this risk prediction tool and maybe some insights that you derive from that. And Emma, it may seem a little bit further apart, but I sense that you have been thinking about this, which is how can you take your specific knowledge and somehow translate it to make life better for humans, if you will?
So let me quickly say a few things about the risk prediction tool we worked on. So the idea is if each person was to use their phone or any other device, but phones are convenient, to predict a personal risk score that say what's the expected viral load that I have? Am I infected? With what probability? And how much? How dangerous am I for others? Of course, you can't answer that for certainty, but you may have a lot of clues, and the clues may come from different sources. And precisely as we're saying, the forte of machine learning is being able to integrate different sources of information. So here, what are the sources of information we could have if people were to use these applications? So people could self-report their symptoms. And there are issues because sometimes they don't, but we can simulate that. People could self-report about conditions they have that make them maybe more prone to the disease. And then the phones or other communication technology can be used to keep track of contacts, and then that's where the privacy issues come in. But I think there are solutions. So if my phone detects that I was spending hours with a person who had a high risk, I'm not sure that that person is infected, but there was a high risk, then that should influence my calculation of my own risk. But how, what's the right formula for this? We don't know, but we can learn it. So we use epidemiological models to simulate those situations and then train machine learning predictors to estimate those risks. And then potentially people can act according to this. And we find in our simulations is that you could reduce the rate of spread of the virus very substantially. I mean, it depends on the adoption rates and things like this, but even at like 40% adoption rate, which is above what I think, maybe that's what the highest that's been achieved by a country, you do get significant gains. And if you had even more adoption, like if people were good citizens, if you go to 70%, then you can really have a drastic effect on the spread of the virus.
Good. So maybe Emma, one interpretation of this question for you is that you spoke about the natural interventions that bats engage in for self-preservation. And the question is whether we can use those ideas to engineer interventions for people.
Yes, I think we absolutely can. And the example that I gave that I briefly touched on, so when we were studying, we were able to isolate bat macrophages. We were able to make them respond if they had an infection, and we looked at how it progressed. And what we could see was a very different immune response than a human cell or a rat cell would have, in terms of a very, very aggressive antiviral response that was dampened then by that anti-inflammatory response. But they're the same cytokines that we have. And by studying how the bats tolerate these infections, we can know then what we can do with our own immune, so we can stimulate our own immune response. So give just enough antiviral at the right time of the infection. And then right when it's beginning to switch, make sure that the anti-inflams come in by studying the bats that have naturally evolved that. And I was so blown away when I saw this work from our local hospital saying, I was like, oh, that's a bat profile. This was right. And so you can go look to nature to find solutions, or something else. If you want to predict what's going to happen, for example, if you look at some of, say, just looking within the genome, look at some of the immune genes and looking at whether or not the single nucleotide polymorphisms that associate with a poor outcome of infection, are they like the bats, or are they not? So you can go and you can use the bats as, these are a tolerant model. You can look at humans, different populations. What's the allelic heterozygosity like of those predictor genes? Are they more like bats or not? And it's quite fascinating because you will find that in populations that maybe have a predominance of a certain type of mutation in a certain gene at a certain site, the bats don't have it, the other species that are supposed to be tolerant don't have it. So we can use this to predict severity of outcome based on genomes potentially. So there's lots of things that we can do.
And if I heard you correctly, this seems like there's another potential opportunity for machine learning, because the timing of that intervention has to be exactly right, and perhaps has to be uniquely tailored to the individual who's experiencing the respiratory failure, if you will. Well, this has been an amazing sharing of these two very different but so important, and hopefully in the future connected, areas of research. Christy and I and the organizers want to thank both of you for your time. And I guess I hand it back over to Tim at this point, correct?
Thanks very much indeed. And again, we give everybody a round of applause because that's fascinating and fabulous of you all. Thank you very much indeed.